Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe below to get all of my new videos and hit the bell icon to make sure they hit your notifications as soon as you log into YouTube. Thanks. Well, if we've learned anything over the past decade, a very dubious proposition, but we'll go with it, it would be the following. It is unequivocally wrong to discriminate against people based on things they can't control. You cannot tell people they either can or cannot do something because of whether they have a certain amount of melanin in their skin or that they're born with certain chromosomes. It's anti-American and anti-Christian and should be rejected. And thankfully, it is being rejected, at least in some ways. The main movement in America that defined this, wokeism, is slowly but surely getting cut down in its current form. DEI centers are being shuttered left and right. Corporations are being brought to heel. Transgender hormones and surgeries for children are now so taboo that it has gained steam with over 80% of the political electorate to ban them. These are tremendous victories, and we should celebrate them as such. But we still have a long way to go. Anti-white and anti-Asian racism still runs rampant in college admissions departments and corporate boardrooms. Even with all the legitimate criticism of the Israeli government that has been raised in the past year, there is still a way too high number of people, particularly young men, expressing actual anti-Semitism via blood-based guilt and collective guilt towards Jewish people. The current governor of New York has said openly that he wants to tax white people more because of their skin color. These are issues that we must tackle before they spiral, as they have done in the past decade, into destruction. However, what is not wrong, and a lesson that many Americans, still have left to learn, is that judging the culture of demographics is different than judging people based on those demographics themselves. The latter is an assessment based on immutable characteristics, which is insufficient for judging the character, morality, and quality of a person. The former is an assessment based on decision-making, which is sufficient for judging the character, morality, and quality of a person. In my years of analyzing and studying various types of cultures, this is the make or break criteria that decides their success or failure. The English poet John Milton is perhaps the best explanation of this on record. Quote, "Luck is the residue of design." How true. Do some people occasionally catch a break that catalyzes their career, expands their income by several degrees, or lands them a date with a girl way out of their league? Absolutely, and we should account for that. But that said, it is not only luck that allows for these quote-unquote breaks to happen. When people say quote-unquote, "I can't catch a break," as Joe Rogan once stated in one of his most famous clips, what they really mean is, quote, "I should be treated differently for no reason at all. My choices don't matter. My decisions mean nothing." But this is untrue. When a person receives a phenomenal new job offer, it's more than likely true that the person toiled for years, honing and perfecting their craft, meticulously grinding away for an opportunity to land that offer. When a person hits it big on a new investment, it's more than likely true that the person had to toil very hard for that capital, invest incorrectly several times, and still have the guts to risk again. When a man lands a date with a woman way out of his league, it's more than likely that man was in his Bible every day, working hard in the gym, finding his way to financial stability, and improving his social skills. These people didn't quote-unquote catch a break. They simply were prepared enough so that when that break showed up, which it inevitably and always does, they could capitalize. And the exact same thing is true for cultures. Are there factors that are inherent to the nation of Somalia, for example, that could make it harder to succeed than the nation of the United Arab Emirates or Dubai? Are there reasons why El Salvador is undoubtedly a better place to live right now than Venezuela? Is there a purpose behind generations of immigrants moving to America and away from every other nation on earth? Of course there are. Some areas have different geographies, ethnic mixes, and things that are features of that nation that make it harder for some nations to succeed than others. Ask Rwanda in the 1990s or Nigeria right now, for example. But the overwhelming answer as to why places like Somalia and Venezuela can never seemingly get things right, and why Dubai and El Salvador have thrived, is the decisions they have chosen to make. Political instability is a choice. Economic systems are a choice. Religious emphasis and freedom is a choice. Hard choices, no doubt about it. But with proper discernment, leadership, and wisdom, they can be made. This is not just a true statement for the cultures of nations. This is a truism for all cultures. For example, one of my best friends when I moved to Austin was a first-generation Cuban American from Miami, Florida. During a conversation at work one day, I was stunned to hear that he had experienced immense amounts of racism, but not from Americans or white people. Rather, he had experienced the most racism by far from other Hispanic people, Colombians, Mexicans, Venezuelans, etc. And I was stunned to hear this as a white person. But Hispanic people, who obviously have more skin in the game of being Hispanic than I do, were not at all. In addition, a great number of my friends are first-generation Nigerian. Over the years, I've noticed something about almost every single one of them. They do not identify as quote-unquote African-American or quote-unquote black. They refer to themselves as quote-unquote Nigerian or quote-unquote Nigerian-American. When I ask why this is, their answer, like my Cuban friends, struck me. They don't identify as African-American or black. Their culture is too different. They would like to keep their own. Now, is this because my Cuban and Nigerian friends are racist against other African or Hispanic nations and peoples? Of course not. My friends are not racist people, because hardly anyone, newsflash, is a racist person. The reason they say these things are simple. For cultural purposes. They believe the actions, choices, and decisions of their culture are superior to those of other cultures who look similar, but achieve far different results because of their actions, choices, and decisions. They're making a proper judgment call, one based on things people can control versus on what they can't control. This is a hard truth to swallow, but that doesn't change the fact that it is indeed true. It is not racist to say that young black men commit more crimes in America than any other demographic we have on record. It is not anti-white racism to say that middle-aged white men are lowering the life expectancy of America by killing themselves in greater quantities. In a more sensitive example, Candace Owens was egged on by the American right, ironically by people like Mark Levin, for years to take every possible shot at black Americans that she could, and she did. But as soon as she turned her focus towards Jewish Americans and Israel, that same logic never applied, particularly for people like Mark Levin. We can play this game of cultural Russian roulette all day long, and in some cases we should, particularly when there are issues that we need to hash out, particularly where there are uncomfortable issues that we need to hash out. But interestingly enough, I don't believe that, as hard as it may believe, we've had the hardest one of these cultural demographic discussions as of yet. The hardest cultural demographic discussion America needs to have has nothing to do, actually, with black, Jewish, or white Americans. Rather, it has everything to do with a group that every one of those groups, and every other group I haven't named, has not touched with a 10-foot pole. White women. American white women have a problem. That problem? Many problems. The issues and problems facing black Americans, Jewish Americans, and white American men have no comparison to what is going on with young white women today. Their problems are immense, their futures are bleak, and their current trajectory is tragic. Now, I should preface this with what I prefaced our earlier discussions with. This is by no means a shot at white women because they have white skin and a second X chromosome. That's just as racist and sexist as it would be in any other scenario. But the reason why it's not the same reason as it is for all the other groups mentioned are the choices that this group has made. All of the issues that American white women face is a result of choices they and the broader culture that enables them have made. As the book of Hosea says, quote, "When you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind." So then the logical next question becomes, what is that whirlwind exactly? What does it constitute? What does it look like? The person who put it in the best terms I've heard, unsurprisingly, is Jordan Peterson. In one of his last big-time interviews before he got sick, Dr. Peterson, in a conversation with Megyn Kelly, said something that has been stuck in my conscience ever since. Quote, "Young women today are where young men were 10 years ago." And having examined just where young men were 10 years ago, this sentence made my stomach drop. Young men were deemed a lost cause 10 years ago, hopeless, addicted, toxic. Just keep feeding them crypto trading platforms and DoorDash, and maybe they'll blow their head off with their dad's 22, or just end up ODing on fentanyl. Better that than actually listening to them. Better that than actually dealing with their problems and helping them with their problems. However, due to a miracle that can only be described as done by the grace of God, young men are starting to turn a corner. Many of them still do the things mentioned, like trade meme coins or on crypto for quote-unquote work, or blow all their money on DoorDash with Klarna. But many young men today are some of the most impressive I've ever met. They go to church, they're getting married, they're starting companies, they're putting others before themselves and submitting themselves to God. These are, thankfully for me, the vast majority of my friends. They are great men, and the world will reap the benefits of them and having them and helping them for generations. So how did this happen? Through a ton of fortitude, resistance, and strength. through an ecosystem of positive male role models, mostly through podcasts and YouTube channels that just had the nerve to say that men were not worthless, through men having enough of getting kicked in the face by people who had the guts and had the guts, who had, or hated their guts rather, and then had the guts to do something about it. We are not close to where we want to be, as evidenced by the problematic ideologies of men such as Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes. But to say that we're not better than we were, and dramatically so, is a complete and utter lie. The same cannot be said, however, for young women. Young women are the most likely generation on record to be anxious or depressed clinically. They're more doped up on anti-anxiety meds and SSRIs than any other demographic in history. They are the most atheistic and liberal group of demographic women that we've ever seen come through our ranks. And most stunningly of all, a recent poll showed two remarkable things. First, that more men than women want to have and start a family. And second, that not only do more men want to have and start families, but for men, it is the thing they want the most. While for women, it's hanging around somewhere in the middle. Probably next to traveling and affirming another young white woman's recent trip to Bali by commenting Yas Queen on her post-trip Instagram post. These are alarming findings and numbers. So for all of us who should want to help young white women, which should be everybody, by the way, including me, we should ask the following. Why has this happened? Why are they alarmingly anxious and depressed? Why have they turned anti-child, anti-family, and anti-God? Why are they more liberal than ever before? Why are young white women in all areas that matter failing, just as young men were doing 10 years ago? In my estimation, there are three factors to this equation, and the first is the following. There have been no more coddled, entitled, and spoiled group of people than American white women. I've long said that the most harmful phrase ever uttered by American parents is, quote, "You're perfect just the way you are." It falsely convinces you that you can do no wrong, that there is no need for self-awareness, that you can just coast without having to prove yourself worthy of what you want. There is no group that has been told how wonderful they are more than American white women. They're fetishized in every hip-hop and rap music video. There is no disparagement of their social lives, unlike the quote-unquote incels and quote-unquote toxic environments that young men apparently inhabit. And I've not met a single one, by the way. Every urban evangelical church has made them their congregation's sacred cow. As Bill Burr once ironically stated in one of his Saturday Night Live monologues, they have somehow slipped their Gucci-booted feet inside of the realm of the woke movement, and not only that, they've taken the pole position. It's astounding when you think about it. But now the crows are coming home to roost. This coddling and entitlement of white women has proverbially, of course, come back around to slap them straight across the face. They clearly have not handled life outside of their bubbles well, at all. When you have to dope yourself up on meds to simply get out of bed every morning, that's not a good sign. Neither is the fact that you view it as some kind of a hindrance to your self-actualization or something to get married and reproduce. Their bent towards liberalism is why everyone who bends towards liberalism does so. They would prefer to be given rather than to earn. Young white women are floundering, just as young men once were. Which leads to my second factor as to why young white women are floundering. In my view, one of the only things that has led to the great revival of masculinity in America within young men was a strong ecosystem of emergent role models in the culture. Perfect role models? No. But at least some role models, many of whom are excellent men, unquestionably. Names like Jocko Willink, David Goggins, Tucker Carlson, Jason Wilson, and yes, even Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes to some degree come to mind. This has not been the case for young women, to put it mildly. Ask yourself this question. Who's the Jordan Peterson for women today? The Michael Jordan, the Tiger Woods, the Ben Shapiro, the Mark Driscoll. Hint, there are none. Young white women have no one to look up to at all. Every time a woman that could have filled the void is tried, think Caitlin Clark or Erica Kirk, for example, they've been shredded and made an example of, torn down by the very women who claim to love, quote-unquote, championing other women. And who are these women doing the shredding? And this perhaps is the scariest part. The word Karen has been tossed around very loosely over the past couple of years. But it's not without reason, because those quote-unquote Karens, the narcissistic hags that currently dominate the internet and are funneling all of this toxic femininity into our young women, are breeding other women to be Karens. These women, these Karen types, mostly deeply unfulfilled, unhappy women on too many anti-anxiety meds, are the greatest indictment of our culture's enablement of the destruction of American white women. The elevation of everything that destroys women, self-obsession, virality, excesses of physical traits, has effectively disenfranchised much of what could otherwise be a very promising generation of women, and in some cases is. But yet, due to the coddling of that generation and the emboldenment of Karen culture due to bad female leadership and role modeling, that has not taken place. Which leads me to the final factor in this equation as to why young white women are falling off a cliff. A disaffection from modern young men towards them. The saying, quote, "I don't need a man," has been popularized in recent years, particularly in the peak of the shameless, quote-unquote, toxic masculinity era. When men were viewed as the most disposable, that saying became ever more popular among young women, particularly given their coddling and entitled nature and emboldening of that coddled and entitled nature by our Karen class. But the whole statement on its face isn't true. Women do need a man, just as, by the way, men do need women. It's not just a political or social principle. It's a spiritual principle. God made Adam to create and cultivate. He created Eve as Adam's helper. He created both of them to become one flesh, to be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth. To say that most men can somehow be fulfilled without women, or that most women can somehow be fulfilled without men, is an asinine statement. But yet, this is what American white women have been told. And what's resulted from this? Well, what would happen if someone told you, as unfortunately many of you have more than likely experienced, that they didn't need or want you, that they could get along just fine without your help, they were unessential to their way of living, so much so that you're not just someone who couldn't help them live a fulfilled life, but you're a hindrance to that fulfilled life. You'd probably, and rightly, say screw them. And this is the exact posture of a concerning amount of young men toward our floundering demographic of young white women, and the third reason as to why this is happening. The way I've described this is harsh and stark, but accurate and truthful. The reason why a large percentage of young men are increasingly turned off towards young white women is that on the outside, women have never been more beautiful. Beauty influencers, Instagram filters, and different cosmetic enhancers have made sure of that. But on the inside, young American white women have never been more spiritually ugly in the eyes of men. They have become so grotesquely unappealing to the vast majority of young men that young men have decided, due to this cultural rot that has festered for years inside of this demographic, that they want no part of it. They're looking elsewhere to find this rising demographic of what young men really want. Feminine, spiritually grounded, submissive, and traditional women who can help them achieve their purpose in life. They see the end destination of the trajectory of young American white women and are running as far away from it as they possibly can, and as fast as they can. And as proof of this, notice throughout this conversation that I've used quote-unquote white as the descriptor for these women. It's not that young men are no longer pursuing women, because that's not true at all. It's that they're no longer pursuing a certain type of woman. Young white women, to be specific. The number of friends that I have who are pursuing women of other non-white races is overwhelmingly high. And the reason is not because of race at all. Because again, most people and my friends are not racist, even against white women. It is, again, a commentary of the toxic culture that young white women have been stewing in. This is why the passport bros, men who go overseas to find women to date, are a thing. This is why the number of interracial relationships and marriages are skyrocketing among young people, and particularly among one demographic: young white men with young non-white women. It is not a comment on race. It is a comment on culture, ones that are attractive and complementarian versus unattractive and independent. If this continues, if Karen culture keeps consuming young white women as a whole, they will continue to spiral. The revolution is being televised. It's only a matter of if we choose to see it or not. And I would recommend, due to, again, me not wanting an entire demographic of young Americans to continue nosediving off a cliff, to do so, no matter how ugly it is. We must begin the stages of a counter-revolution to undo this mess we're currently in. The best way to start a revolution is through tough conversations. And I would urge us to start having them, and start having them now.